instead of being able to process and handle this together, I am packing a bag. I don't know for how long, and getting in the car uh, and going to my base up north.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast. My name's Zach Reeser. I'm your host. And if this is your first time joining us, I want to say welcome. And if you're part of the Skilled Dad Society, coming back for another episode, I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad that you come back to the podcast because it means you're getting the value. I love the stories that you all share with me and the things you've been able to take away and apply. And I'm really excited about today's episode and who I'm sitting down with, because with this podcast, it's all about the fact that we're dads and we have things that we experience that are almost universal from what I've found in the conversations that I've had, both on and off the microphone. And then the cool thing is the context of our stories is the difference that we can all have an experience we learn from, and then we can share it with others to help them, whether get a different insight or be prepared for something new. And, we say that if we're a couple chapters ahead of somebody else in something in our experience, then we can teach others. And we don't have to restart everything over and over. In this case, this is a pretty unique story, I think, for a lot of us, but it's also a story that a lot of dads around the world have experienced in their own different way. But I had a chance to talk with this gentleman a few weeks ago at this point, and now we're sitting down finally. And Mr. Noam Markose is joining me from Jerusalem, and we're going to have a little fun. So Noam, welcome to the Skilled Dad Podcast, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Hey, absolutely. So Noam is, you're in profession world, you're in marketing, right? You're a savant of marketing, right? I added savant, but I'm leaning on that. Let's go with it. Yeah. And you're a dad of 4. Remind me, what's the age range that you've got going at home?
So I'm actually we're in between the birthdays of my oldest two.
Okay.
So my oldest is a boy. He's turning 11 next week, and then I have a 9-year-old, newly minted 9-year-old. She had her birthday earlier this week,
Nice.
and then I have 2 younger girls, 6.5 and 3.5.
Okay. You and I are pretty close with the spread, but you've got one more than me, so bonus points. So 11, 9, 6, and 3.5. 6.5, 3.5. That's a good spread right there. It keeps you busy, I'm sure.
Yeah. The key is to have the next one before you have gotten to the good life. Before forgetting what it's like to have a baby. It's like, don't forget what diapers are before you have the next one, because then it's too hard to go back to that.
That's fair. Okay, that's I would say I would agree with you 100%. And then I think we forgot. Well, I think for us it was, we started to enjoy some of the sleep a little bit more, and we're like, do we really? We're getting older. I don't know. So, never say never. 11, 9, 6, 3.5. That's awesome, dude. So you are rock and rolling over there in your household, and you live in Jerusalem. Were you born there? Are you native to Jerusalem?
No, I was. So this is not what a native Israeli sounds like. I was I was born in Toronto.
There you go.
So and my parents are American. And they moved to Canada after they got married. I was born there, and we moved to Israel when I was 7.
Okay.
So I essentially grew up in Jerusalem, but in an English-speaking household.
Okay. Makes sense. Well, I haven't talked to too many natives, I guess. So it could just have a really good English accent, I guess. But so being in Jerusalem since you're 7, and some of your story lends to this. That's pretty much like been home for you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I lived here my entire life from age 7 We had a couple, like 2.5 years. My wife and I lived in a city called Herzliya, which is close to Tel Aviv. When we were both in college, but she went to college there. So we moved to live closer to where she was going to school. But then eventually we moved back to Jerusalem. So yeah, this is home for me. Absolutely.
So, just for context, for those of us that listen, so I know there's people listening, mostly United States. We've got Canada, Germany, Switzerland, England, kind of all over. And how far of a distance is, Tel Aviv from Jerusalem?
So the entire country of Israel is about the size of New Jersey.
Mhm.
So it's on the smaller end of the states, if you're talking U.S. And it takes about, I would say, between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, it could take an hour to drive with minimal traffic. There's usually more traffic, but it's about, uh, depending on where in Jerusalem and where in Tel Aviv, but between 60 and 70 kilometers distance, which is 40 miles or so.
Okay. So it takes longer to get across Nashville at 5 p.m. traffic, I think, than it sounds like getting across there. So I lay that out for context, just for some of the story that you and
Yeah.
I talked about. But
No, it's a very
But-
small country. It's just very close. Relatively speaking, the distances are very close to get from city to city, and yeah.
yeah. Well, I think that's it's good to have perspective, especially when we're just coming from different. For those in the States, I mean, it's huge. It's a huge country, and I lived in Europe for a little while, and it's just amazing. You could hop on a train and be in a couple different countries within, an hour, 2 hours, depending on where you were. So, well, no, I'm going to hand it over to you. And, I gave a little bit of an intro, but, introduce yourself a little bit more for us, and then we'll just kind of dive into our conversation from there.
Okay, so yeah, as I said, married. I've been married for 14 years, and with the 4 kids, I am in marketing. I specifically do demand generation or user acquisition, which is kind of I'm in charge of all of the paid ads for the tech company that I work for. So ads on Google or on Facebook or on TikTok, etc. And I've been doing that since I got out of school for about 12 years. Um, I love baseball. I've played baseball basically since we moved to Israel. So since I was 7, I was on the Israeli national team. Traveled a little bit with the team when I was a teenager.
Nice.
Recently transitioned to softball as I'm 38 years old now, and that's kind of the natural flow of things. But yeah, I play amateur fast pitch softball in the spring and in the fall. So that's a huge hobby of mine.
What position do you play?
In softball, everything but pitcher. I can't do the underarm, underhand pitching, but I can play any other position. Recently, last time a couple years ago, when I played on the national team, I was playing third base. But for my regular team, I play catcher often, third, short, outfield, whatever.
Nice. Catcher. That's where it was for me. I
Yeah,
loved it.
the knees are still holding up.
That's good. Yeah, keep those rocking. Maybe give it a couple of years. With taking care of yourself, you'd be all right. So with demand, you got the demand generation going. You got some baseball going. And family of 4. You are busy. You are definitely busy. So in the last, I think when we talked, one of the things that I said at the beginning of the podcast is all the things that we have in common as dads, right? So, you've got sports going on. We've got work that we tend to. We've got family that we take care of. And one of the things that you and I talked about was, kind of your story over the last couple of years when you've got 4 at home. And then there's times where we're called to do something more, whether expected or unexpected, and to kind of step up and we know that there's been a lot going on within Israel, and just looking at the size, that's what, when you and I talked, in relative terms, we look at the size of Israel versus, the U.S. or the states that we have, and it lends to some of your story and what you needed to do. Just maybe tell us some about what you and I talked about over the last year and a half, where what life has looked like as a dad, and for you, and also what that's done with and for your family.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and give some context and kind of paint a picture of what what life has looked like here, specifically for my family since October 7th. Um, so, and if you want to stop me if I'm, going into anything that might need some extra context, so feel free. But basically, October 7th, most of us who have even been remotely connected to the news has an idea of the significance of that day and what came after it for the past year and 4 months. For us, so October 7th was a Saturday and a Jewish holiday. I'm an observant Jew. We celebrate the Sabbath, and we celebrate holidays, the Jewish holidays. And so besides being a Sabbath and a holiday, it's also the last holiday in a string of the Jewish fall holidays, meaning, if we're taking the parenting perspective, kids have been home for several weeks and not in school, not in kindergarten. And this is kind of the finish line for us as parents for like, okay, we love our kids, but it's hectic having them home all the time and having to, find ways to entertain them or to help them entertain themselves. And we're ready for them to go back to their routine. We very much love the routine. We like getting up, going to work, sending the kids off to school in the morning. It feels good. It feels a part of, not losing ourselves as adults also. So we're at this finish line.
I think a lot of guys can relate to that. I know I can, because we just went through that period of the holiday season. You love it. Right. You want more of it until you don't. And they're like, okay, now we need a rhythm again. We got to get back into a rhythm. So totally get that.
Yeah. So we're at the finish line. And this holiday that we were celebrating on that day is a holiday of joy. There's, we get together as a community. There's a lot of dancing and singing and celebration. And basically, while we were getting ready to go to synagogue and celebrate this holiday, at 8:30 in the morning, a siren goes off. Now, sirens don't usually go off in Jerusalem because of the geographic placement of the city and how far it is from the various borders of Israel. And also that Jerusalem is on a mountain. They usually, the terrorist organizations around us usually don't shoot rockets at Jerusalem because there's a big Arab population in Jerusalem, and there are holy sites for Muslims, and they're not so accurate. And B, it's kind of hard to ensure a direct hit. So, long story short, there's not usually sirens in Jerusalem, and that was strange for us. Another interesting fact here is that being observant, we don't use our phones, we don't use electricity on holidays and on Sabbath. So we're not looking at our phones. Normally, during the week, if there's a siren, I turn on my phone and like checking the news and seeing, what was that all about? Because the news channels here, they'll push it out right away. So, we went into our safe room. Every apartment, relatively new apartment in Israel has a safe room that has thicker walls and a metal door and metal window. So we went into the safe room in our apartment, with the kids, trying to stay calm. The kids aren't used to this, but, if the parents are calm, then the kids are calm. So we took them in there, stayed in there for 10 minutes, and then came out and continued to get ready. And then there was another siren. And by that point, we realized that something's up, because one siren could have been a fluke. Two, something's going on. So we kind of went over to the side, my wife and I, we turned on our phones, and were shocked. The headlines were Israel's at a state of war. We started reading about, the invasion in the southern border, um, terrorists marching in and whole slew of atrocities that, we don't necessarily need to go into here.
Right.
We went to synagogue. We continued our day and tried to maintain normalcy as much as we could. While we were at synagogue that day, there were more sirens. We had to take the service down into the safe room of the building where we gather. And eventually we came back home. And as things developed, I realized that this is a situation where Israel is in an close to be in an all-out war, and the IDF is going to call up all of its reserve troops. And so I am an active reservist. I served my mandatory military service when I was 18 for 4 years. It's 3 years mandatory, and then an extra year that I added on because I went to officer school. And I, continued to do since I was released from the Army. 2, 3, 4 weeks a year of training, mostly for this day, basically. And so I was called up, indeed. And at the end of the holiday, so it ended at about 6 p.m., where we can kind of go back to normal, put the house back together, and go to our phones. My wife and I, the best way that I can describe it is we were torn apart. Okay. So we had about 12 hours to kind of swallow what has happened and what is happening now. There's hostages. There's, people have been killed in their houses, that, Israel is at a state of war. And what does that mean? That means kids aren't going to school the next day, because they're gonna cancel school until they have control of everything. And instead of being able to process and handle this together, I am packing a bag. I don't know for how long, and getting in the car, and going to my base up north. My unit is stationed up north, by the way, and many of the reservists and the reserve units that were called up on October 7th were sent to the northern border to defend the northern border and the towns that are close to the border with Lebanon, so that a similar situation doesn't develop there, like it did in the southern border with Gaza. So that's kind of the day itself.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, IDF is Israeli Defense Force. And within Israel, you mentioned it, there's mandatory service. Is that mandatory service for men and women?
Yes.
Okay.
It's mandatory for men and women. It's 3 years for men, or when I was drafted in 2005, it was 3 years for men and 2 years for women.
Okay. So would your wife have been called up as well then?
So there's the mandatory service that you have to do when you're 18. And then based on what your position was, where you were placed for your mandatory service, when you're released, you are then placed in a reserve unit. So there are many people who are released and are not needed for the reserve units. But a lot of mostly combat soldiers or combat support roles are needed for the various reserve units. My wife doesn't do reserve duty. So she did her mandatory 2 years. She was in the education, an educational unit of the Army. And she was not placed in a reserve unit.
Got it. So it wasn't like both of you necessarily being called up at the same time. So you're packing your bags. You guys are trying to process, what's just going on. And now you've got to load up and head north. So how are the kids doing with this during the time? I mean, I'm sure it was confusing, but what'd that look like?
Um, it was confusing. Each one of them, here's the significance, of the different ages, even though they're so close together. Each one of them kind of handled it differently. Um, the older two understood more what was going on. Even though, that day, we didn't share with them everything that was happening because, like, this is bad stuff. Like, these are the scenes of nightmares. Eventually, there was no, it was on the news, and everything that happened was so out in the public that we couldn't keep it from them. But my, 10, not even 10, my 9-year-old at the time, who's now turning 11, um, he didn't know right away that there were hostages. But a couple weeks later, when he went back to school, he found out, we had to, there was a whole kind of set of guidance for parents how to talk to your kids about the situation that was put out by the Ministry of Education. So the older two kind of, were being brave for mom and dad. Um, and the youngest didn't quite understand what was going on. She was, let's see, she's turning
She's
4 now.
she's baby.
Yeah, she was, not yet 3.
Right.
So she didn't really know what was going on. And the now 6-year-old, she was, sad. She was upset. She didn't want me to leave, but not because of the situation, just because of, oh, like, this isn't our routine. Like, why do you have to go? And I will say that I then spent the next 3 months, October, November, December, going back and forth, like in active reserve duty and going back and forth from my base. And it got worse. The re-entry and the leaving again got worse than it was that first day. So, we got to a point where I would get up in the morning and put on my uniform to go back to base, and all of the kids just started crying. They all were like, because they have no sense of time. They just they started crying, and they would start asking me, when are you coming back? And later on, there was a certain point where, while I was gone, one of my daughters asked my wife, when is dad coming back to visit? Which is painful question to
Yeah.
hear.
To visit.
So yeah, to visit my house.
Did you
Yeah.
know? Like, did you have an idea of how long you're going to be there?
No, I didn't know how long it was going to be. Even I showed up on base on October 7th, and it was like, oh, maybe we'll be here for, like, a week, 10 days, and then we'll go home. I did not know that it was going to be 3 months of active duty with, visiting home every
Right.
now and then another 4 months of kind of going to base for 3 or 4 days at a time every couple of weeks to do shifts. So it was like 7 months of my life that was, you know, dominated by this
Right.
by this added pressure.
Right. Well, just all the uncertainty. I think that as a dad, kind of putting myself in your shoes too. I mean, when something happens like that, and then you just don't know, um, and you're packing up. Now, how far away was your base? We talked about distance before, but how far
Yeah,
away was your base?
not so far. So the distance from Jerusalem to the northern border, like all the way to the border, is less than 100 miles. And my base was probably 15, 20 miles from the border. So, we're talking like 70 miles from home, something like that.
Right.
So it's not far. It's like an hour and a half drive on a good day.
Right.
So, between an hour and a half and 2 hour drive. So it's not far. That's the nature of military service in Israel. We're not getting deployed to Afghanistan or to, some country in the Middle East, like, the folks in the U.S. military. We all of our action is on our borders. It's all, a short drive away. You go to your base. It could feel like it's really far from home, but
Right.
during your service, soldiers are coming home to their parents, to their childhood bedroom, once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, once every 4 weeks, doing
Mhm.
laundry at home. It's a very different type of service.
Yeah. Well, it almost makes it, that's part of the reason I ask is because if you're an hour and a half away and then you don't see him for weeks at a time, it's like, well, I could just jump in and go home. And that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is you're there for a reason. And that reason is to be on guard and protect for whatever threat may come. But my family's only an hour and a half away. And so, that's just kind of an interesting perspective for those of us that don't have that experience. And so,
Yeah.
as a dad, I'm just curious, how that was um,
It's a it's a
in general.
very it's a very mixed feeling,
Mhm.
because, like I said, on the seventh, we kind of split and became, you know, me by myself, and then my wife handling the 4 kids, and the lack of routine and the uncertainty and just the emotional overload of everything that was going on in Israel at the time by herself. And my wife is amazing. I think in many situations, there's the knee jerk reaction of saying to the soldiers, like, "Thank you for your service, and you're the heroes of our country." Like, the wives at home are the heroes of the country, holding the routine, like maintaining sanity with the kids, like that. That was huge, and she did that amazingly. And part of that was that she developed a routine with them
Mm.
and developed this muscle of doing it all by herself. She had help from our community and from siblings, but you know, she had to do it on her own. She didn't know when I was coming home each time, and you know, she just had to do it. And she's not one to kind of wallow in oh, poor me. I like, why me? And all of my friends, like, their husbands are too old to be called to reserves, and they're both at home during this time, and I'm here by myself. And my brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband, was also called up, and he was actually injured, and my sister-in-law had to be with him, and so their two of their kids, my wife was taking care of two of their kids also. So
Oh
you know
man.
she is the hero in many respects of this story. And often, even if I had, let's say, 12 hours between shifts, and I could potentially go home, drive
Mhm.
home, spend some time at home, take a nice shower, and then go back to base, it was more harmful and more disruptive to her and to the routine that she developed. And while I missed them terribly while I was on base, it was often just better to stay,
Yeah.
and to let them continue in that routine.
Yeah.
Um, and
Makes
yeah,
sense.
the re-entry and the leaving again, like that was hard. That it was great for me to see them, and I needed them to. I They were like an integral part of the recharging of my energy, and and
Hmm.
and and giving me the strength to go back. But it was often you know chaos when I came home,
Yeah.
and that's hard. That's like a complex emotional roller coaster going on
Yeah.
there.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of us married up. Sounds like you did too. But everyone steps into their role and what they could do and what they needed to do and that time, it sounds like. And hopefully your brother-in-law's recovered and doing okay.
Yeah, he lost an eye,
Mm.
so he has a glass eye now. But thank God, it could have been much worse, and he's okay now. They moved to Jerusalem. Actually, they live not far from us, so we get to hang out with them a lot. So yeah,
Well, I'm glad to hear that, that all things being considered. Uh, and yeah, kudos to your wife. I'll cut that blurb out and send it to you, and you just be like, here you go. Here you
in
go.
case you
Here you go,
forgot.
mama. Yeah. And just gave you the love. Um, but no, that's so true. And I think in many scenarios, whether it's, I mean, this is an accelerated scary situation everyone stepped into. On the daily, I think there's an opportunity to look at that unifying factor that a lot of us have, which is whether we're business travelers or we're gone for extended periods of time, or some of my military friends, I've heard some similar things like, mama steps up and gets that rhythm, and that's the communication. We might think we could just jump into it and it's gonna be all good, but that can mess that flow and rhythm. So I understand completely what you're talking about. Um, so you were there for 3 or 4 months, and then really a total of 7 months within that first year being called kind of in and out of duty. Um, I mean, how's it been? So we're talking, since the time, like, are you still involved? Like, what's it look like for you guys? Because I know it's just been that was a huge jolt for a lot of people during that time there. And there's still a lot going on with it, but kind of where are you guys at now?
So yeah, so I finished that initial 7 months around April, and then had a few months off from in terms of reserve duty. And then September 29th, I think it was, uh, the entire year following October 7th, there was this conversation on and off, like what is Israel going to do in Lebanon with Hezbollah, which is kind of the much bigger, scarier um, uh, terrorist organization. And that eventually happened starting the end of September. And I was called up again on September 29th to do a similar thing. I didn't mention my job. I'm a communications officer, and I do my base or my position is within a control room of one of the reserve divisions up north. So I'm away from danger. I'm kind of just in this room doing 12-hour shifts. And so I was called up again end of September for another 5 weeks while we were the IDF was operating in Lebanon uh, with Hezbollah. So we were, as a family, much more prepared for that, even though it was a surprise and it was around the holidays. It was a year later of those fall holidays. And it was hard to not be together for many of those holidays. That's family time, and we missed a lot of that. But that muscle was so strong already, and I knew a little bit more what to expect. The kids knew what to expect. My wife, not to say that it wasn't hard, but there was less of an element of surprise and of kind of unpredictability.
Right.
So we made it through that, and that ended end of October, or first week of November, actually. And since then, it's been routine. It's been kind of blessed routine. November, December, now closing in on January. So it's been since October 7th. We're closing in on the end of the first 3 months of real routine. This is for me personally. There are many of my friends who serve in more combat roles, have been in and out, and have done many more days of reserves than I have. And it's still disrupting many lives. So yeah, there's, my story is mine, and there are, thousands of other stories of disruption.
Right. Well, your story is yours, and that's the experience you can pull from. But you are seeing, like you said, some of your buddies and some of your friends that probably have similar things that are going on with home and rhythms and that whole thing. But it just kind of continues further. So that's tricky. Well, I know that this is really just it's how you summarize and paraphrase an experience over a year's time period during something that's you know incredibly unexpected, shocking, and then jolts not only the entire community but entire nation, and how it impacts. And if you see news and all those things, you'll read headlines, and it is so macro. And I think it is important for any scenario to look at the micro of which is our lives in the context and what we experience, but then also what we can learn from. So I appreciate you, giving a tidbit of that and sharing some of that story. And um, just one last question, because as I said at the very beginning, you know, I love doing this podcast because what I've found is that, I can sit across the table or the screen in this case with somebody that also loves to play baseball. And, then you get into softball and you're like, well, this is okay. Still love baseball, by the way. Uh, but, and knows the rhythms and has the same feeling of, we love the kids, we love the seasons, we love the time off. Now let's get back into a rhythm. Those commonalities that we have. And I know that, as dads, that's our connection point. That's our piece that, we all have in common that someone else may not. And that's the differentiating factor. Um, but as dad, outside of this experience, what are a couple of things that you've learned over the 11 years, that maybe another dad that's just getting started, or anyone that maybe has younger kids, whatever, that you've learned that's like, hey, here's some things I learned. Put this in your pocket for a rainy day.
Well, I'll say every kid is different. We learned that first when my oldest daughter was born, so she's our second child. My son, he was an angel baby. He, it was so easy to sleep train him. He just, magically slept through the night. When he was teething, his teeth just suddenly we noticed, oh, there's a tooth. Like, he didn't cry once. And we said to ourselves, they're 2 years apart. We said to ourselves, right before my daughter was born, like, oh, great. Like, good on us. We make easy babies. And then she was born and she was not like him. And she was much more sensitive to pain, to, different sensations. She didn't sleep train as easy. That's just an example from the first time we experienced another child. And really, they are all different, and they are not clones of us. They have similarities to us. And, my 9-year-old hates when everybody sees her and they're like, oh my God, you look just like your mom. But they do their own thing, and they might be similar to us. They might have similar interests because they want to be like us in certain ways, and they might have interests because they don't want to be like us in certain ways. And, I found that it gives me the most peace to celebrate them for who they are. When my obsession with baseball didn't quite transfer to my son. I signed him up for Little League when he was 7 or 6, even T-ball. And, the coach of the team was not amazing, and he wasn't really into it. And he decided he wanted to quit. And he is he's very emotionally intelligent, and he felt like he was disappointing me by quitting. And, it felt like the right thing to just support him for that. And yeah, now he plays soccer and he does karate, and he loves those two things. And it just feels much better to not try and force him into the same passion as me, and just, celebrate him for who he is. And, when over the past year, when he's shown interest in, watching football with me on Sunday nights, it's Sunday nights for us because of the time difference.
Are we talking football? Or are we talking soccer? I've been talking to a lot of
American
Brits lately.
football,
Okay,
American football, NFL. Then that's been amazing. And he came to it, himself. I didn't force him to. And that's much more fulfilling, knowing that, hey, I am who I am. I put my interests out there. I am, natural as much as I can be as a dad. Whatever rubs off, great. Whatever situations they develop their own interests, also great. And maybe I will have some new interests because of them. Who knows? That could be amazing too.
Good words. Yeah, that's good. You know what's going to rub off? I think, eh, if you heard this phrase before, I know we've said it on this podcast. So if you've been around for a while, you've heard it, more is caught than taught. And that's not been coined here. That's been borrowed. I'd give full credit to the person that said it. I honestly don't know where it originally came from. Jason Kimbrough was the first one that said it on this podcast, but I think over this last year, your son being old enough to, because I have a almost 10-year-old, and it's amazing. I mean, just amazing how, luckily, if he is like any of us, he's more like his mom, and he's just really intellectual, deep thinker, and picks up on a lot of stuff. But your son saw what happened. He may not have all the information, but he still sees what dad and mom do, and he saw you step up, and he saw you do what you had to do, and help to lead and protect the family, which I think is one of those things that a young man, it's good to see that, so that they can at least be exposed to it. But he got to see what you did, so that's awesome. And that's also very true. Speaking from my own experience, they're all different. They have some things like us, but I've got one that's going to build a rocket, one that's going to fly it, one that's going to jump out of it. 100%. Like, that's my crew. No, it's good. That's really good. Well, Noam, I appreciate you being on here with me. Would love to stay in touch with you, and maybe just share some more dad stories down the road. But I just appreciate you taking the time to be on here and share some of this story of a unique scenario for that many in the world don't experience, but there are many around where you are that are experiencing that. So thanks for sharing that.
My pleasure. It was a blast.
I love it, man. Well, hey, be safe, stay in touch, and keep on leading your family well. You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you made it this far to the podcast, I want to say thank you for being part of this conversation, being part of the time. Sometimes we get on here and forget that this is a recorded thing, and it's just because it's just a fun conversation to sit across from somebody that I've met, and hopefully you can feel like you're part of that conversation too. This is a unique story, like I just said, in that a lot of people within that country, and there's other countries that have things going on as well, are experiencing something different than what a lot of us experience because it's so close to home. But what I love to see is, what we talked about before, in that we've got men that are leading their families all around the world, and we can see the common interests that we have together. We can see the common things that we're facing. We can see the vibes and the rhythms that we both love to have and want to get back into. For those of you that just came out of the holidays around the US, I think a lot of you know what that's like. But when we look at when a time comes and we need to step up, whatever that may be. Now, this is a big event where we need to step up. But as dads, as leaders, there's going to be a time where it's time for us to step up. And each day we have a choice that we get to go and show up for our family and do what we need to do to help protect them, to lead them, and to teach them. And hopefully you can take something away from this story, if anything, another perspective, another connection point with another dad across the water, wherever you might be listening from. We can all come in and support each other as dads. So I want to say thank you for joining in on this podcast. If you think of somebody that would benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. And at the end of the day, I hope that you can continue to build your knowledge, build your skills so that you can apply them on your journey to becoming the skilled dad.